In this screencast, I want to show you how easy it is to add a .gitignore file to your Git projects so that you can hide certain files from the repository and not have them synced back and forth. This can be really beneficial when you have files that you want to keep local to your machine that don't need to be collaborated on with other people, or when you're working in certain environments and IDEs that have configuration environment-based variables or environment documents like a text file that tracks variables for that environment that don't need to be synced with anyone else because they're relevant just to you. So what we're going to do really quick is I'm going to cd to my desktop basically, and we're just going to make a folder we're going to work with. So I'll call it project, and we'll cd into project. In here, I'm just going to add a couple files that we can work with. The touch command is perfect for that. It allows us to just say, hey, make a file. So I'll tell it to make an index file, and then I'll also tell it to make something like a todo.txt file, and that'll be where, and let me just open up this folder so we can see it, where the index would definitely be pushed up to my repo. I could make additions to it, keep adding content to it. This to-do is going to be my own list. It's going to be personally just for me. So you can see here that if I was to, right now this is not a Git repository, I can just run git init and it will make it one, and if I do git status, it'll tell me what's going on. It says, hey, you have 2 untracked files. Now I can make my initial commit, wonderful, and I'll say git commit. I could do that there. Actually, let me show you as well. If I open up github.com, or I'm sorry, GitHub the application, let me drag this project into GitHub the application so you can see I'm seeing the same information. I have 2 projects, 2 things to track there. Wonderful. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and commit these as my initial commit, but like I said, let me show you something important here. If I said, well, this to-do is kind of important to me specifically, I'm the only one's going to need to see it. It doesn't need to be a part of what I'm pushing up there. It's just something I'm keeping here locally. I can actually add a file called gitignore, and it's actually .gitignore because it's a hidden file, to this project, and any specific file name that I list in there, it'll actually ignore that from all of the commitments that I'll make in addition. And actually, when I run git status, you'll see in a moment, it won't actually track it anymore. So I'm going to touch a .gitignore file, and once I do that, if I do git status again, I'll just go up to that. You can see it's got 3 of them now. It's still tracking this one because I haven't told it not to, so I'm actually going to use that terminal editor called Pico to edit git.ignore, and I'm going to add to do, and what's important is that it's exactly capitalized lowercase. It has the same case structure as the file, otherwise it won't notice that. So we're good to go here because it's the same exact one. And if I go ahead and close this, do I want to save it? Yes. That's the name. Wonderful. And if I run git status again, just so we can see what's going on, it says, ooh, look at that. It says todo.txt is no longer part of that. It's no longer tracking it. Wonderful. In the best case scenario, this is what you want. And again, if I go to my GitHub application, look at that. It's no longer tracking that because I added this in my gitignore. Sometimes, though, you'll have files you'll add to your directory. You'll go to ignore them, and you'll realize that it's not working correctly. And let's see if we can get that to happen here. I'm going to add in, let's go ahead and add in a style dot, let's do layout dot psd. Oops, touch layout.psd. All right, so if I do my listing, those are the things. I have those 3 in there. If I do my git status, I have all those there. And now, if I was to, and let me go ahead and make a commitment so we can see a difference here. I'll just go here and I'll say this is my initial commit with gitignore. All right, so that's committed. Wonderful. That's good to go. Git status is still, everything's cleaned up. Now, let's say I don't want to track the PSD anymore. I'm going to go and just for fun, let me open up this PSD, and you know what? Let's go ahead and open this up just so we can make a quick change to it so that it tells it it's different. Once it does that, I'm going to tell my gitignore, oh, you know what? I don't want to push my PSDs. For whatever reason, I've decided that file, I no longer need it to be online. It's not going to be a part of what I'm doing. So we'll go ahead and tell it to do that. This is going to open it up. I'll just make a really quick change so it has that binary tracking change that it has there. There we go. Ah, the file is empty. No problem. We're going to edit it right now. Apparently it doesn't want to let me do that. No problem. We'll make a brand new one, and we'll just call it the same thing. apparently did not like the touch command. And we'll just put a simple box in here, just so we know that this is what this is. Wonderful. Great. Now that's saved. Now it's different. If I go back here, we'll see, hey, that's a difference. Wonderful. And let's, for fun, go to and tell gitignore we want to ignore PSD files. Because obviously, if we do git status, it's going to say you modified your PSTs. Let's say for some reason I don't want to track them. If I was to go, again, pico back to my gitignore, I could down here, I can't just type PSTs. It's going to actually still notice the PSTs there. I can do layout, specifically the name of that PST. I close that, I do yes. Wonderful. If I do git status again, it still says that you want to push something to layout.pst. And if I check here, it says it here as well. And I can tell, well, clearly, if I open up and let's just for fun go to my, oh, I'm sorry, not yet. Back to this, it definitely does say layout lowercase .pst. So what exactly is going on that even though it knows, let's go back here just to make sure. We close this. Yep, it says layout.pst. Wonderful. We're going to close that and save it just to be sure. If we go here again, I'm not sure why this one isn't telling us that that one's there. We clearly see that it is there, but it's still tracking that PST. So something that might happen is that even though we told Git to ignore it, because we edited the PST first and then added it to the gitignore, it's kind of a little confused. And really all we have to do is tell Git, okay, can you go ahead and forget what I told you that we wanted to track, and then check again to see what we do want to track. And it's really easy to do that. I have the commands listed here in a sticky just so that I don't incorrectly type them. But what we want to do is we're going to tell Git, the first command here, oops, let's type in the right place, is that we're going to tell Git to remove the dot is all the working tree, is say, hey, basically this the things that we're looking at, let's just stop looking at those for a second. So it's basically going to say recursively look and get rid of all the working tree, not the files, but just what you were looking at. Can you stop looking at those? It's going to say, great, those are the ones I was trying to track, and you said not to look at those. And now go ahead and add them. Look at the working tree again. And what this does is it says, I'll look at the tree, but first I'll check what's new, what's changed, and is there anything that's ignored, and it'll ignore it. So if we do that, and then we do git status, we should see that, so git the layout was removed and gitignore is updated. So if we go back, if we click right here, we should see that this is what's going on. And I wrote this down just so we can make a commitment. We can do it right here. But you can see that it removed this from there because even though that file, and you'll see in a second, even though I make a commit, updated the dot, or the gitignore file. Even though I make a commitment and it says I deleted the layout, that layout is still here. It didn't delete it from our computer. It just removed it from the repository. Again, that's what we wanted it to do. So if you happen to come across, one, if you set things up correctly or from the outset, I know I'm not going to track this file, and you set your gitignore initially, you won't come into this issue. But if you happen to get into the issue of I made the file, I made changes, and then I added the ignore, you might have to go, and it's a really simple thing to do. It's just to tell it, first thing is that please stop looking at what you're looking at, and then go ahead and check again, and then it should notice those changes. And you can, again, I had these commands here, you can make a commit right in your terminal, but if you're comfortable working with an editor or an IDE like I'm using GitHub application, then you can check there as well. And as long as I'm using this, there's actually a really handy feature I can use under settings of this application that allows me to add these things right here in the application. I don't have to go back and forth between, I was using the Pico editor here in Terminal. As long as you can use Terminal, but as long as you're comfortable using this command, I could just tell it, you know what, let me go ahead and add things here. So if I said, I also want to ignore another file, whatever that file name is here, whatever, .pdf, and hit save, it'll start tracking those changes. And actually, if I hit save and do that, you can see that, oh, looks like you want to update your gitignore file. So kind of cool. Let me go ahead and delete that. A really common one that you'll actually may have already noticed if you've been working with the Mac and GitHub is a dot, and I'll go ahead and type the name here so you can see it, .ds, those are capital underscore and then capital S tor. So DS store file. This is one that actually, if you've been saving your stuff on the Mac, pushing it up no matter what the application you're using or terminal, and pushing it up to github.com, you'll see this one show up a lot because this is on the Macintosh. This is the directory store, directory structure file. It's the listing of your files in your computer. The reason I typically have that as the very first thing I ignore in my projects is that nothing else needs to see that except the Macintosh. So if people download this on a Windows machine, on a Linux machine, or even when I'm working on the website, this file is unessential to them. So I actually add it pretty often right at the very base of my, I'll start a gitignore file and I'll have it right there and just start my project with that. So I'll actually say ignore ds store files. And actually, I like my comments to be consistent, so we'll type the exact name. So we'll do that, and then now, from now on, whenever I go to add those, it no longer will track those. Mine wasn't showing it, but I'm sure if you, again, if you've been working with the Mac, you probably did see those files show up there. They start with a dot, so that means they're also going to be hidden files, but we definitely don't need to be pushing them back and forth. And again, depending on the IDE, integrated development environment you're using, like if you're using Aptana or Eclipse, they often are storing local files that have a dot extension that are hidden in your project folder, but are things that you necessarily wouldn't push up because they're going to change every few seconds every time you compile. So that's a great thing to add to your gitignore here. And along those lines, this is a pretty common thing that a lot of people have had to deal with. So there's actually a really cool project on GitHub that they've put together, and I love that GitHub, the web service, has Git repos of really cool resources. It's kind of very Inception-like, but there is actually a repo called gitignore, and it's a bunch of really helpful ignore files. So if you're working with action scripts, it's things like go ahead and hide the dot project or the dot flex properties one that would be updated every single time you compile. Or if we scroll down here, if you're working with the expression engine, here's another one that basically gets you underway with that. It's just a really great list of things you should maybe ignore when you start a project. And even better than that is when you click that little green button on github.com to make a new repo and you get to this page, one of the options you have after you name your repository is to initialize this repo with a gitignore file. So you can drop in a README, and you can also choose, well, I know this is going to be, like I said, an ActionScript project, and I want to hide that project file or dot project and flex properties. I could actually start with that, and that would be, it would automatically ignore that, which is kind of cool, or a whole bunch of other ones that are listed here. So very kind of cool stuff. Again, if these are just starting points, when you click this, all it's going to do is make a, and if we just click into one of these, like this Jekyll one here, you can see all it is just hiding this default repository location. It's not anything special, it's just a .gitignore file. You would just remove that extension, that name in front of it, and it would be .gitignore. So what's cool about that is if you started with this, then you would just, when you want to change it, you would just open up either in a text editor here, or like if we were in Pico, if I went here and maybe I had started with that Jekyll one and it was that underscore site slash, I would just add things below it and keep adding stuff to my list. So it's kind of cool that there's already stuff built into a repo that you can grab from and that we now know how to make our own. But if you want to start your project with this and you know you're going to be working with a particular language that has some common issues, or really just a common thing that gets saved automatically, this is a great place to pull those from. And one last thing I'll mention is that if you still need a little bit of assistance with this, you can actually go to the github.com help section and look under using Git. There's actually an ignoring files area. It'll talk about what I just mentioned, how to name the file, what to put in it, but they'll actually mention a really cool but a little bit of an advanced feature in that you can set a global gitignore. So basically every project you make that you say I'm going to use Git as a revisioning system for it, you can tell it to ignore these particular things. So that way you don't have to continually do that. And actually, I didn't mention another one just because it's an additional, maybe not advanced, but just a little bit more, another complex aspect to it, or another aspect, is that if you put an asterisk in front of any file name, it'll actually ignore all the files of that type. I know I mentioned before you can't just type a dot extension and it'll do it, but that's because I wanted to keep this separate. So for now, I would recommend starting out with something simple and ignoring the .ds store and then ignoring certain files. And then you can actually look at some really great ways that you can ignore globally different things, and there's lots of good documentation in this as well. I'm sure other references as well. All right, have fun.